And there was one more brushstroke: remission. And it allowed us to throw ourselves into our marriage with the passion, if not the energy, of a pair of teenagers in love. In our own way, we feasted on love, every mode of it. Solemn and merry, romantic and realistic, sometimes as dramatic as a thunderstorm, and sometimes as unemphatic and as comfortable as putting on your soft slippers. Years ago, when I wrote about medieval love poetry, I was blind enough to treat it as a purely literary phenomenon. I know better now. I never realized I would have in my 60s the happiness that had passed me by in my 20s. Well, as the end of the third year of remission came upon us, Joy went along for one of her usual checkups. Ironically, it was probably the only checkup that we ever approached without any dread. Her health seemed so complete. But oh, how cruel life can be. The X-ray revealed that the cancer spots had returned to the bones. It was like being recaptured by the giant after you seemed to have got through every gate and are nearly out of sight of his castle. Well, now came the waiting. And while we waited, we had to go on living. Could one ask for a second miracle? Joy grew weaker, but not so weak that she couldn't badger me to take her to Greece. And so I decided that as she had so long wanted to see the Parthenon, climb the steps of Mycenae, that we should go. And we went with two friends. And she was very resilient while we were there. I remember one night in the restaurant, she was in a very impish mood. There was an awful Greek band playing, and so she was getting little pellets of bread, rolling them in her finger and flicking them, trying to hit one of the band members. She was in good spirits when we got back. She had realized one of her greatest lifelong this worldly ambitions. The last time she was rushed into hospital, it was in great pain. But she never lost her perspective, nor her humor. Don't get me posh coffins, Jack. Posh coffins are all rot. I was with her when she died. Warnie and I were plunged into despair. Of course, Warnie had come to love her almost as much as I had, but of course in a different sort of way, seeing her as a sister we never had. He did as he had always done in a crisis. He turned to drink. I did as I had always done in a crisis. I picked up my pen and wrote. And the words were very angry to start off with. I was so angry with God. I don't think I was in any danger of ceasing to believe in him. The real danger was coming to believe such dreadful things about him. The conclusion I dreaded was not so there's no God after all, but so this is what God's like. I remember ranting one time to God. You led us up the garden path, didn't you? Time after time, when you seemed most gracious, you were really preparing the next torture. Of course, it was a yell. Little more than mere abuse, telling God what I thought about him. And of course, as in all abusive language, what I thought didn't really mean what I thought true. Only what I thought would offend him most. And then gradually my grief subsided. And I came to realize that I was looking at my situation from the wrong perspective. It was all about before this, it was all about what we hadn't had rather than what we had. And I remembered that when we got married that second time, or when she came home, we had expected to have maybe a few weeks, no more than a few months. And we had been given 3 years. And I came to see that he was the giver and she was the gift. And what a gift. She was my mother and my daughter, my pupil and my teacher, my subject and my sovereign, and always holding all these things in solution, my trusty comrade, friend, shipmate, fellow soldier. If we had never fallen in love, we should nonetheless been always together and created a scandal. I used to refer to her as a sword. Well, that's true as far as it goes, but utterly inadequate by itself and misleading. I ought to have balanced it. I ought to have said, but also like a garden, like a nest of gardens, wall within wall, hedge within hedge, more secret, more fertile, more fragrant, the further you entered. And then of her and of every created thing I praise, I should say, in some way, in its unique way, like him who made it. Thus up from the garden to the gardener, from the sword to the smith, to the life-giving life and the beauty. That makes beautiful. Do you know what I said to her near the very end? If you can, I said, if it is allowed, come to me when I too am on my deathbed. Allowed, she said. Heaven would have a job to hold me, and as for hell, I'd break it into bits. Oh, she knew she was speaking a kind of mythological language with even an element of comedy in it. There was a twinkle as well as a tear in her eye. But there was no myth. No joke, deeper than any feeling that flashed through her. Her last words to the chaplain were, I am at peace with God. Her last words to me were, you have made me very happy. And then she smiled. But she didn't smile at me. And she didn't smile at the chaplain. She had turned to the eternal fountain. And at that very moment she had entered in. And now her face shone with his reflected glory. We are all to shine like the sun. We are to be given the morning star. In one way, God has already given us the morning star. You can get up on many a fine morning and see the gift if you get up early enough. But you say, what more do we want? Well, we do want so much more. We don't merely want to see beauty, though God knows that that is bounty enough. We want something that can hardly be put into words. We want to pass into the beauty we see, become united with the beauty, receive it into ourselves. That's why the poets tell us such lovely falsehoods. They speak as if the west wind could really sweep into the human soul. But it can't. Yet, if we are to take the imagery of Scripture seriously, if we believe that God will one day give us the morning star, cause us to put on the splendor of the sun, then we may surmise that the poets, though very false as history, are very near the truth as prophecy. At the present, we are on the outside of the world, the wrong side of the door. We discern the freshness and the purity of the morning, but they do not make us fresh and pure. We cannot mingle as we would like with the splendors that we see. But all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it shall not always be so. One day, God willing, we shall enter in. And in there, in beyond nature, we shall eat of the tree of life. But the cross comes before the crown. A cleft has opened in the pitiless walls of the world, and we are invited to follow our captain inside. I suppose it may be possible to think hereafter too much of our own glory, but I do not think it is possible to think too much or too often of our neighbor's glory. It is a serious thing to remember that we live in a society of possible gods and goddesses. There are no ordinary people. You have never spoken to a mere mortal. Natures, civilizations, arts, cultures, these are mortal. Their life to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is with immortals that we work, joke, snub, marry, exploit. Oh, I do not mean to say that we are to be perpetually solemn. We must play. But our merriment must be of that kind, and I think it is the best kind, which exists between people who have from the outset taken one another seriously. No presumption, no flippancy, no superiority. And our love must be a real and costly love, with deep feeling for the sins in spite of which we love the sinner. Not some indulgence or mere tolerance which parodies love as flippancy parodies merriment. I venture to suggest that your neighbor is one of the most precious objects presented to your senses, and one of the most important. And if he or she is your Christian neighbor, they are important in another way. Because in him and in her, Christ the glorifier, glory himself, is truly hidden. And if we are not only writers and scholars, but educators, then I think we can legitimately say that our pupils are our neighbors. I can't see anything in the nature of the younger generation which stops them from accepting Christianity. If somebody is prepared to tell them, many are ready to listen. And we face a challenge to be true to our Christianity and our calling. Well, I must stop. I think it's probably accurate to say that Warnie is not going to be back in time for me to make you a cup of tea. So I'm sorry about that. But I really have enjoyed your company. If you are ever in Knoxville again, and I'm still around, you are welcome to a return visit. Till that time, enjoy yourselves. Have a good journey back to America. And thank you very much for coming to see us in our home.